Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second of ILX's PRINCE2 Agile webinars, this one with a particular focus on the public sector. My name is Stephen Savage, and I'm the Head of Marketing for ILX Group, and it's my pleasure to introduce Andy West, one of ILX's leading PRINCE2 Agile trainers. Andy has over 30 years of project management experience, the last 15 years as a trainer, and he's part of the first cohort globally of trainers accredited for PRINCE2 Agile. We don't have a great deal of time, so I'm going to hand over to Andy shortly, but I'd like to make you aware that you can ask questions throughout by typing them. One of my main roles here, as well as to keep Andy on piste, is to pick out those questions that are most common, most popular, and most relevant to what Andy's talking about, and I'll drop those into the presentation if I feel Andy hasn't already answered them. So without further ado, Andy, I'd like to hand over to you, and you can take up the vast majority of the time.
Thank you, Stephen. Welcome everybody to this webinar. You would normally be able to see me. We're having a slight fun with the technology, as with these sorts of things. So unfortunately, all you're going to get is a brief picture of me, and then I'm going to vanish into the ether, I think is the right way of putting it. The purpose of this is to look at PRINCE2 Agile, particularly as a new product, but Agile project management generally, so that we understand what's going on. I don't have huge numbers of slides. I don't want to kind of death by PowerPoint as we go through this. So the sorts of things I'm going to try and cover this afternoon, and it takes me on there. Briefly, what is Agile? How does it compare to, if you like, traditional project management methods? Why is it gaining popularity? And particularly, what pressures are there on your sorts of organizations to be more agile in your projects? What does that actually mean to projects in terms of the techniques, tools, the things that we use? And finally, then we're going to have a look at how we might adopt Agile as an organization. So we're going to try and cover all these four things. As Stephen said, if you have any questions, please type them in, and we'll try and grab them and answer them as the way through. And I'll give you some space and time at the end of this to actually ask a few more if anything comes to mind right at the very end. So without further ado then, firstly, what is Agile? What do we mean by being Agile? You'll hear lots of things in the press about Agile project management and being more Agile as an organization. The term itself, Agile, comes from software development, and it just is a different way of trying to develop the product that you want. Let me show you something to try and explain what's going on. If you have a look at this slide, on the left-hand side, we have what's called, if you like, the waterfall method. This is the term used in software development, but can be used for any project. It's the kind of traditional project, and it's a linear kind of serial piece of work. You do one piece of work, and when you've finished it, you trigger the next piece of work. The idea is it falls in a series of waterfalls from one piece of work to the next. So traditionally, in a waterfall type of project, you would start with things like gathering requirements, making sure there's a clear understanding of what you want, what you're going to deliver, and you'd ask lots of people what's going to happen. You then start to move this into some kind of development phase of actually building what's been asked. Then that moves into testing. Having done all the build, you do all the testing, and then you do things like training, and then the final bit will be kind of commissioning. And if you notice on the left-hand side, it says something goes into operational use at the end of all of those pieces of work. And of course, what happens with this is that sometimes people don't know what they want, or they don't know clearly what they want because they haven't seen what's actually available, and therefore we get lots of change. And the traditional project has always been run like that, so that we have pieces of work running in serial fashion, and you hand over to the next team in the project, and you do this. The idea with Agile is that rather than having this one large piece of work, what you do is you do smaller pieces of work, iterative and incremental development. The idea being that you build something that you can deliver quickly. So you go through all the same steps, but you've got the basic set of requirements. You go through requirements gathering, you go through the design, you go through the build, you go through the testing, you go through commissioning. And if you notice on the right-hand side, We got something going into operational use much earlier. But having done one piece of work, then the first team, the requirements team, are then gathering the next set of requirements. We're adding something to what we've already built. And the idea is that rather than build, if you like, one lump, we build it as a series of steps. We keep adding to what we've done already. An example of this. Now, I have to apologise for this. The things you remember always seem to be the things that go wrong. So if you were involved with this and you have some unpleasant memories, I do apologise now. And I have to say that I am speaking as an outsider in this. A good example of a linear project would have been the national NHS project, the idea to build a spine with lots of information on it that could be shared nationally wherever you were. This went through requirements development and some analysis and some prioritization. And actually, the project went through this again and again and again. And as the requirements got bigger and bigger and bigger, the projected cost of this project got bigger and bigger and bigger, until it was seen that actually it was too big and therefore the project was cancelled. Now, the actual idea of this national IT project there was actually a very simple one, actually a brilliant one in my personal thought, which was if anybody went to a doctor's or a hospital anywhere in the UK, you could go online and find out their history, who they were. If this had been dealt with in an agile point of view, the idea would have been to put something in place fairly quickly that doesn't provide all of the requirements, but provides something which is useful fairly early on. We could then do next steps, adding more to it. So for example, it may have been a first step in this, may have been we could put in a name and it tells us who their doctor is and what the phone number is, basic history. Maybe next one is add a bit more detail of any current medicines. The next one is it has history of the last year. And finally, it might has access to everybody. But the idea of this iterative incremental work is rather than try and do things as one big lump, we do it as a series of steps, as a series of development processes. That's particularly started in kind of the business as usual world of improving current systems. But this has now been brought back into the world of projects. So we look at changing those sorts of things. Now, importantly to say that is this always appropriate? I was actually at the weekend on LinkedIn having a look at a discussion about Agile in projects and those sorts of things. And there's a very interesting discussion about when is it appropriate and when is it not appropriate. And there's a couple of people giving the example of developing websites and those sorts of things. And then somebody used the example of a billing system in a commercial organization. And the argument was that actually if you're going to go live and you have a billing system where you can't bill everybody and all the things you want to do, then it's not really a system that you can use as an organization. And therefore a more waterfall, more traditional approach may be more appropriate. So the point here sometimes is it's not are we agile or not, it's how agile do we need to be. And in some situations, it may be better to, if you like, the traditional waterfall approach. But in other situations, it may be much better to be much more agile and do this development. This is particularly true if we're trying to do something new. And some of the techniques we talk about in terms of agile are about putting things out there to test whether this is a good idea or not before we go live with a hugely expensive kind of problem and realize it's not actually something that we want. So that's, if you like, what Agile is about. It was traditionally only for software development, and it looked purely at the technical level. One of the things that, if you like, established the purpose behind Agile, it's called the Agile Manifesto, and it's a kind of statement of what we want as a way of developing software. And as you can see, it actually quotes that. It says, we're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do it. And through this work, we come to value. And it talks about individuals' interactions. Have we got the right people? Are they working together closely? Do we have ownership? Do we have that kind of personal commitment? Rather than the fact that we work in a clear linear process and we're using the right tools. So it's about that kind of creativity we're looking for here. Working software over comprehensive documentation. What we want is to be able to launch something that works, that people can use, rather than having lots and lots of paperwork tells us exactly what's going on. That doesn't mean that we don't want paperwork, just that getting the software to be a usable, functional, useful piece of software is much more important than sometimes all of that documentation. Collaboration rather than contract negotiation. So rather than being seen as two sides of separate fences working together, this is particularly important when you're trying to work with external developers in this kind of environment. It's how do we free up that kind of contractor relationship so there's a collaborative nature to the work rather than I do this because that's what my contract says. And the important thing here is responding to change. The important thing about Agile is that it works to fixed time and cost, and it varies what you deliver. Whereas the traditional method very much deals with working to what you deliver and varies time and cost. And what we're saying with Agile is that, yes, the things on the right do have some value and we should not ignore them completely, but the things on the left-hand side are what we value more in the Agile environment. So it's to ensure that we have all of those sorts of things going on. So I feel like that's where Agile has come from. That's where we're going. What we've got to consider is why is it so popular? Why is this pressure at the moment? And very simply, if I was to put this up, one of the key concerns we have here is projects running late, or sometimes over budget. Projects that don't deliver the right output. So you delivered something and it's actually what we wanted. Or the other big problem with the traditional one is that by the time we've actually finished the project, what's been delivered is now out of date because of changes in the environment and those sorts of things. If we're to look at the public sector, as a community, you are under pressure from central government, from finance, to do more with less, to make sure that the resources you have are being used in the most appropriate way, and that what you deliver is delivering value in your organization and particularly to your clients. I hesitate to use customers, the users of your services. Are you delivering what they want in a way that they want, in a place that they want? So Agile gives us a way of being much more flexible about what we deliver, about getting something out to our users as early as possible so we can get their buy-in, their commitment, their interest. And there are lots of ways that we start to have a look at this. Agile isn't really a single set of, if you do this, you're Agile. The best definition I've seen of Agile, and this actually comes from the PRINCE2 Agile manual, it says that Agile is a family of behaviors, concepts, frameworks, and techniques. And that's an interesting thought process. It's a family. It kind of suggests collaboration. It kind of suggests support. But it allows us, if we use these tools, to consider how much of this do I need? Am I at the traditional end because it needs to be a kind of big bang kind of delivery? Or is it much more important that we get something out there so that people can see what's going on? And there are different sorts of concepts that come in here. What is interesting, we put this slide together actually a couple of weeks ago, just before I went on holiday. And the past weekend, the Sunday Times actually had a supplement about project management. And interestingly, they identified the top three reasons for project failure over the last 10 years. They didn't actually publish all of them, but interestingly, if we look at 2014, what it says is that poor estimates in planning. Well, if this is something new and we don't know how long it's going to take, then our estimates are always going to be guesses. And if we're going to go for big bang delivery, then we are going to be trying to deliver something and we're guessing. At that point, the project may well run late and or over budget because we have that lack of experience. It just changes in the scope of a big project. Well, this could be because there's been a change in the environment. Therefore, we need to react to the project. And if we don't have change control embedded, if we don't have the flexibility to do what's doing, then we will deliver something they don't actually require. And that also picks up the thought process about changes in environment and are we being flexible to pick those sorts of things up. The last common reason for project failure in 2014 may strike a resonance with you, which is insufficient resources. Do we have the capacity to do this? Are we trying to do too much? With the traditional project, the waterfall method, if you like, it's always focused on delivering everything. And the problem is, if that becomes very big, then it becomes too expensive and therefore we can't have it. The idea with Agile is we look at what do we actually need? What will start to work for us? What will start to deliver some kind of benefit that we can start to actually implement? As I've said before, it started with software development, but it's actually to move into other areas. And again, from the Sunday Times supplement, a couple of examples from your own environment of these sorts of things going on. The first, which was the Department for Work and Pensions, developing a system for administering the carers allowance for people looking after sick and disabled, was developed using an agile process. And it actually got a kind of customer satisfaction rating of 90% in terms of it being developed with doing what they want in a way that they want. So they've got those sorts of things. Interestingly, the article also quotes the Department of Justice, who are using it for a non-software development project. What they're looking for is methods of organising their estates team across multiple sites to make sure there's proper governance of the estates across all of the kind of sites they're responsible for. And therefore they're doing it on an incremental basis rather than trying doing it every site across the UK in one go. So although this has started out being a software development area, we can see it starting to move into this. The important thing about Agile is that we try and fix time and cost. So we're working to, this is what we want to do, and what we flex is scope, what's included in this project. And we do this at all levels. We need some flexibility about what we're going to deliver, which means we need the requirements prioritized clearly. What must be delivered? What should be delivered? What could be delivered? And what's on the wish list? What would be nice to have? And therefore, because we have fixed time and cost, if we start to run out of time and money, what we start to do is drop things from the bottom of the requirements. Importantly, by doing this, we're always focusing on our customers, our users. What do they actually want? And this is where the collaborative nature of Agile is so important, in that we have to have them represented in our project team to make those kind of decisions. What is it we actually want? What's critical? And are we delivering the right sort of things? There are a whole series of different techniques and tools that might be used. Words you may hear thrown around. So you hear things like Scrum. You hear things like Kanban, Lean Startup, Cynefin. Those four techniques probably start to cover something like 90% of the tools, techniques used within Agile. So, and then you'll see kind of combinations of those. It's Scrum Kanban or Agile Scrum or those sorts of things. Agile is a collection of all of these techniques used in an appropriate way to help you run your projects more flexibly. One of the most useful ones that I like there is actually something called Lean Startup, which is a really nice thought process and looks at what's called the minimum viable product. What could we deliver that our users can actually use that shows whether they want it and whether it meets their need? So we're not going for the full system, what we're going for is the minimum. This allows us to launch something with our users and check use, buy-in. Unfortunately, one of the best examples of this is a website. And the idea is that if it doesn't work, if people don't want it, then you can just collapse it. The example given is that if you want to put up a website to say, do you want more information from us? And this actually might be something, say, for a health authority, do you want to access service on? If you put up that kind of header screen that says, are you interested in, and then some buttons to press to take you to the next pages, what you might not have done is built the next pages. What you have is a minimum viable product. When people select those buttons, what they get is a failure, the page wasn't available. But you as the organization can then trigger, is there interest in those subjects? And if there is, then clearly it's worthwhile building those products, filling in those pages, expanding the content on your website. If the answer is nobody clicks on that page, should you go any further? So one of the watchwords with Lean Startup is fail fast, learn quickly, which is a good way of saying, is this something we really want? Is there something that our users see as valuable? And if not, let's not do any more. But if so, let's do something to get it going. What I want to look at is, if you like, one of the key things that comes along in here, which is the idea of Scrum. The idea of Scrum is a way of gathering work together and then putting it into manageable chunks. And it allows the project team, the development team, to work on what's critical. So we have a look at this diagram. There's quite a lot of information on here and a number of abbreviations I will try to explain to you. We start on the left-hand side, and the PO means the product owner. Now, in PRINCE2 terms, of those who use PRINCE2, this is essentially the user. This is the person who says, this is what I want, and this is most important to you. And if you notice in the slide, it's got a number of graduations, detailed information at the top. These are the most important things. Often these are done in what are called user stories, a way of defining what the users want in a clear way. The idea of the prioritization, we can then break all of that product backlog, what we want to build, into what are called a sprint. And a sprint is a piece of development work. It starts with the development team and the SM, the Scrum Master, essentially the person in charge of that development team, who's going to enable them to do the work together. Now, I have to say that when we're looking at Agile, what we're looking for is a much more collaborative kind of work process. So they talk about what's called servant leadership rather than command and control. Now, if you talk to many project managers, even in the traditional method, command and control is not how they manage their people anyway. So there's no great conflict here. It is about, have I got commitment? Have I got interest? Do people know what's going on? The idea of the sprint planning meeting is to take the top elements of the product backlog, the things which are most important, to put those into and to agree what's going to be done in this particular sprint. Now, a sprint is a piece of work that on average is recommended to last somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. So we're looking at a fixed period of time, and the sprint backlog is what we intend to do in those 2 or 4 weeks. And it looks at what are we going to do, how we're going to do it. It's agreeing the work in the development team. And this is where we get collaboration. This is where we get commitment. What we need here is a group of skilled people that allow us to do all the things necessary to, if you like, define, build, test, and launch that particular item. Because the important thing is, at the end of a sprint, there will be a product that will go into use. It's not something that's going to sit on the shelf and wait for something else. It's something we can launch into its user environment. The development team then go into the sprint. They're doing the development work. The monitoring process here essentially is the daily Scrum meeting. It's about progress. The recommendation in Scrum is that these are stand-up meetings. They last 15 minutes. What did I do yesterday? What's working well? What barriers? What do I intend to do today? It's a way of agreeing work and keeping everybody in the team abreast of what's going on. The Scrum Master here is there to facilitate, to ensure they understand what's going on. And importantly here, if there are things which are going to fall outside those 2 to 4 weeks, the agreed time box of the sprint, then those are dropped out of this particular sprint. And essentially that is reported back to the product owner of, we're not going to do this in this particular sprint. The product owner then would pick those items up and put them back into the product backlog, and this will then flow back into the next sprint planning meeting. What are we going to do in the next sprint? At the end of each piece of work, there's a sprint review, what's worked, what have we delivered, how well, and a retrospective. Essentially, what can we do better? So this comes back very neatly into the ideas of continuous improvement and picking up the ideas of ensuring that we're doing things better next time round, learning from experience. Now that's essentially an overview of, if you like, Scrum, the most common word you'll probably hear in Agile. It can be applied to any sort of product, providing you can do it in an incremental, iterative basis, and that's the important thing. It may be a 2-week sprint, it may be a 4-week sprint. Certainly I think those terms have come out very much from the software development angle. You may find that if you're talking about non-software development, the non-software areas, that some of the sprints may be of slightly different lengths, but that's kind of what's recommended. One of the other tools that's often talked about within this is Kanban. Kanban is a monitoring tool that allows you to see where you are clearly, the use of that kind of progress measurement. And particularly what Kanban is trying to do is reduce or minimize the amount of work in progress. It sets limits on how much work can be in certain areas to ensure you have the right number of resources to do this. And therefore things may be held back or moved forward to ensure that you keep the work in progress at a minimum level. Of course, starts to indicate which things can't be done within this sprint and must be reported back. Now, importantly here, if you've dealt with traditional project management, you've always had this kind of reporting, and it's about, well, how do I deal with change? How do I know what's been dropped out? Clearly with this, every time there's a change request, the product owner would be adding or agreeing to add that into the product backlog. And therefore we have a way of agreeing change and adding things into the product backlog, which then may be added to subsequent sprints as we go through. If things get dropped out of sprints for constraints on time and cost, then what actually happens is that the report from the development team to the project manager will clearly indicate which things can be done within the sprint and which can't. And therefore your routine reporting, if we're talking in a PRINCE2 world, things like checkpoint reports, will give you a clear indicator of what work is not being done and therefore will need to be added to the product backlog and considered for the next sprint. So we have two ways of ensuring that change is being done. Requests coming from outside, we add directly to the product backlog for future work. Things we drop out of this sprint, this scrum, are sent back to the project manager as part of the routine reporting. They're added to the product backlog, reprioritized, and then the next sprint is agreed as we move forward. This allows us this kind of iterative, incremental process, a way of building things as we go through and improving work. And this fundamentally is what we're trying to talk about within kind of agile frameworks. I mentioned Cynefin earlier on. Cynefin is another kind of development area, and it looks at what kind of solution is appropriate. So it's kind of looks at the context of what you're trying to do. Is this something where it's just about applying best practice? Is this something where you need to start again from scratch? Is it highly innovative? Do you know where you are? So Cynefin allows you in lots of ways as part of the product backlog and the development team to consider what kind of environment and therefore what kind of innovation techniques might be appropriate as you go through. How innovative should we build as a solution?
Andy, could I just pop in here and drop in a question that's come from one of our attendees? Using your NHS software project as an example, your agile suggestion appears to chime closely with program management techniques, i.e. breaking down something very large into tranches that deliver individual outputs but bring wider benefits. Do you consider there to be similarities?
It is a very similar idea. If you look at MSP, you look at programs, the whole point of not planning a program in the whole is it's too big, it's too complicated, and therefore it gives you that flexibility. Now, a program is a very high level thing. This is kind of applying the same kind of logic pattern, but at a lower level. So yes, I see there is a similarity there. And if you have an organization that is using something like MSP for programs, then you might find that using Agile at a project level of the development process feels like a natural thing to do. Okay. So the question is, well, if we want to become more Agile, well, how do we do it? And there are choices here. There are essentially two sorts or two established Agile project management methodologies. There's PRINCE2 Agile, which has been recently launched, which is an enhancement, if you like, to PRINCE2. And then there's AgilePM, Agile Project Management, which has been in existence for about 8 to 10 years. It's based on the dynamic systems development model, DSDM Atten. As it says on my slide, it's the old established Agile method. It was a link between the original software development method, DSDM Atten, and PRINCE2. It particularly tried to plug the gaps in the pre-2009 PRINCE2. Before 2009, PRINCE2 didn't really talk about scope management. It kind of mentioned it and kind of glossed over. It did kind of assume we were working in a very traditional manner. And therefore AgilePM was written as an integration, a kind of plugging of the gap between software development and PRINCE2 itself. PRINCE2 was updated in 2009 and therefore plugged a lot of those gaps itself. PRINCE2 2009 onwards actually is Agile compliant. The PRINCE2 Agile that's been launched this year essentially is the additional behaviours, frameworks, focus areas and techniques that allow you to work in an Agile way in your existing PRINCE2 environment. So the point here is, what do we have in place? What have we got in the organisation? Well, if you're already using PRINCE2, and we are aware that many organisations in the public sector have embedded PRINCE2, maybe in your own way, you've got your own version of it, it's your own method, but you're essentially using PRINCE2, to throw that away and just go, we're going to become Agile, actually may not be appropriate, because for some projects you still need the full PRINCE2 method. You may still need the traditional kind of waterfall method for delivering the project. It's got to be done in one lump. By adopting PRINCE2 Agile, where it says is for certain projects, the appropriate projects, you can now use a more agile development method and link that into the reporting and control systems that you already have in PRINCE2. And one of the key things we have people here is concerns of, if we've got PRINCE2 and we like it because it's a control system, why would I want to move away from it? Well, with PRINCE2 Agile, you won't. What you'll be doing is adding the techniques and tools that allow you to be more agile at that kind of low level and still control your projects. If you don't have PRINCE2, but you want to be more agile, you want to have a better system, then maybe AgilePM is actually more appropriate for you, because it's actually looking at how do I put some control systems on top of my development processes. I want to be agile, I want to be flexible, but I still want control as an organization. And AgilePM may be an appropriate way of doing this. There was an interesting comment from actually one of my colleagues that said, well, I'm sure I've seen somewhere that Agile is much more adopted in organizations that aren't very good at projects, that don't really have some kind of techniques in place. And I think the point there is that there has always been that kind of, if you're using PRINCE2, you can't be agile because PRINCE2 says you've got to do these things. We've always got the control system. Whereas if you didn't have PRINCE2 in place, then people are going to adopt that kind of an agile method straight away. There isn't a contradiction here. It is about making sure that we're doing what's best for us as an organization. And it may well be that the organizations that haven't got, if you like, formal project management in place have adopted agile development methods. What they may be missing is some of the control functions which the senior management are actually looking in place. So just to expand on those two things in a couple of ways. PRINCE2 Agile was launched in July of this year. It builds on PRINCE2 best practice. PRINCE2 is the de facto standard for project management in the UK. It's the most commonly referred to methodology in the UK, and I suspect actually worldwide. It actually has been trained in at least 110 countries in the world. What it starts to do is link the Agile development methodology with the PRINCE2 control functions, so that as an organization, as a project manager, or if you're in the management area, as a project executive or a senior responsible officer, senior responsible owner of a project, you can keep control of what's going on in your project. What it starts to look at is delivering on time to budget, and it protects quality by saying we're always going to work to this, if you like, quality standard, to this kind of level. It's got to be fit for purpose. What it starts to say out is some things that you say, we won't do that now, we'll do that later. There's an interesting question here that says, is there a risk that continual development outputs is that the business as usual and projects become blurred? And absolutely, that is one of the key things. So one of the things you have to consider in your product backlog is what do we consider to be part of the project and calling a halt to the development point of that. And then business as usual, if you like, is the updates to make it better. So one of the ideas here is scoping and saying, what do we consider with a project? What is about delivering something new? And I think the important thing here, to pick up your question, is to ensure that there's a clear difference. This is something new for the organization. This isn't really something that's about development of something we've already got. And I think that's the way of, if you like, differentiating between them. Business as usual Agile is about improving what you've already got. If it is about delivering something new, something different, then that's Project Agile. And I think that's the important difference between them. One of the key things here is, as an organization, can we define the difference between what's a project and what's not? And interestingly, Christopher, that has actually come up as a concern in quite a number of discussions, and is one of the principles of good governance listed by the Association of Project Management. If as an organization we can't differentiate, we probably won't manage either of them very well. If we can differentiate between them, we can do it much better. So there you go, PRINCE2 Agile. It's trying to ensure that we're measuring those sorts of things, but we're making sure we have a clear distinction of what we can vary and what we can't. There's a nice kind of model of a hexagon in PRINCE2 Agile where we fix time and cost. We might flex benefits and risk, and we can flex quality and scope. What are we building and how much are we building? If I look at AgilePM then, just as an alternative, as I said before, this was seen as a fill-in, the gap between the software development methods of DSDM Atern and PRINCE2 before 2009. So it allowed constant change in terms of elaboration of the detail. Rather like a program, it didn't try and define everything at the start. It allowed you that development process. Again, clearly defined scope. What do we consider to be the change and what is revisions of business as usual is a clear distinction here. It allows us to continue correct course and maintain an idea on the target. What are we going to do? Therefore, clear objectives at a high level are still important here. Very much like PRINCE2. It talks about the delivery of products. Not how much work are we doing, what have we actually delivered? And with this idea of continual development, it's can we say that yes, we have a viable product here, that it's working. And the idea is to maintain the high rate of progress by using the sprints, the scrums, the scrum meetings to ensure that people are doing work with a sense of collaboration. Other things that start to pick up, and again, if you like, come back to the idea of, if you like, soft skills that PRINCE2 doesn't really cover, targeting and creating empowered teams so that teams are self-directed. They talk about what's called servant leadership, so that it's kind of led from within without being overview. It does require a no-blame culture. What it also requires is a great deal of collaboration with the customer. What do I really want? Is that what I've actually wanted all the way through? And the idea is it's team success. We've achieved this together. And if it goes wrong, there's no individual blame. It's because the team as a group have not managed to achieve this. This is appropriate for those organizations that haven't already adopted PRINCE2 or don't have a formal project management method in place, or one that maybe not based on PRINCE2. The AgilePM would add those sorts of control functions you need to kind of support the agile development techniques. Again, interesting question on here. Oh, I'm doing the PRINCE2 practitioner requalification. Do anything to add in the component? In terms of doing the PRINCE2 Agile, you can only do the PRINCE2 Agile if you are a current PRINCE2 registered practitioner. So, Mark, what you need to do is complete your requalification, which is the 1 hour exam that you may have done in the past before. This is then additional to that, because what this is not doing is saying we're going to get rid of PRINCE2, it's what we add to PRINCE2. So this is an additional course to add on to what's going on. So please continue with your practitioner requalification, and then if you want to pick up PRINCE2 Agile, come back and do it then. Yvonne, no, in fact, it's one of the things that they had to make a statement and go, who is this aimed at? And so they made a decision when they were writing PRINCE2 is that you had to be a practitioner in order to then pick up PRINCE2 Agile as an individual. Now, clearly as an organization, you might start to pick up those skills with a number of people in there. If you only have foundation, you work in the team, if you're not the project manager, it may well be that you don't need the full qualification. What it may well be is you need some lower level, some kind of briefing on what does Agile mean to our work environment. And that actually comes to an important point, that if we want to implement Agile in any form, whether it's PRINCE2 Agile or AgilePM, or how do we go about it? Well, clearly it's a project in its own right, because you're trying to change something, you're trying to change how you work. And one of the things here is awareness. Does everybody who's going to work in this environment understand what you mean by Agile project management or PRINCE2 Agile? Do they understand what it means to work in an Agile environment? Sorry, Ben. Yes, I will read the questions out so I can answer them as I go through. The important thing here is if you want to move your organization into a more agile way of working, this is about developing awareness. This is about developing commitment to a more agile method at an organizational level. Are your development teams, both, if you like, IT, software, and non-IT, aware of what we mean by Agile? Do they need some training in Agile? Do your project managers need some training? Do you need to update your processes? Do you have some written clear rules about how you do these sorts of things? How you run projects? What needs to be changed here? This should be addressed as a project, and it's considering where are we now, where do we want to go, and this actually would be a good thing. What small changes, what are the important things we should do first? Can you deliver this project in an agile method to show how it works? Which kind of sounds a glib answer, but by showing it works, it actually helps people do these sorts of things. Is there an exam at the end of PRINCE2 Agile? Please know more about how to get the PRINCE2 Agile qualification. Yes. If you want to contact for those sorts of questions, our two senior business development managers who particularly look after the public sector, Michelle and Zilla, their details are on screen at the moment. The exam at the end of the PRINCE2 Agile is an objective test exam, very similar to the objective test exam in the PRINCE2 Practitioner. It gives you a scenario and asks you to apply the Agile techniques to that scenario. Again, it's a 55% pass rate, just like the PRINCE2 Practitioner, but details of how you do it and more can be obtained from both Michelle and Zilla as we go through. Are there any more questions?
Thanks, Andy. That was great. And almost perfect for time. There's just a couple of the pre-submitted questions that I think you haven't answered and would be nice to finish on. I'll ask you both of them together. Will PRINCE2 Agile be as safe a solution as PRINCE2 has been historically? And do you think Agile will take off in the public sector, and why?
PRINCE2 is seen as a structured method. Particularly if you already have PRINCE2, you're not losing it. So will it be as safe as PRINCE2? Yes, you're retaining all the things about PRINCE2 that give you security, that give you that confidence in delivery and in monitoring what's going on. Do I think it'll take off within the public sector? Absolutely. In my experience, public sector is always under pressure to do more with less, to not overspend, to deliver on time. And if I'm being slightly cynical, the public sector is a very easy target for the media to go, oh, look, they were late again. Oh, look, they've overspent. With that kind of pressure, I think that the use of Agile, if you like, the idea of fixing time and cost, but getting something delivered that works, that gets user benefit, I would see as a big way forward for the public sector.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Andy. We're going to call things to a close now because we're a little tight for time. I'd just like to say we will be distributing all the slides that Andy presented today. We'll also be distributing a recording of the webinar, which you can listen to at your own leisure. We've recently published a white paper on PRINCE2 Agile, which is available on our website. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be producing another white paper comparing and contrasting PRINCE2 Agile and AgilePM. So thank you for your attendance. As Andy said, if you have any further questions on PRINCE2 Agile or AgilePM for the public sector, please direct them to Michelle and or Zilla, whose details are on screen now. Thank you, Andy, and thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you.
Sorry, we have to get a bit closer.
That's all right. That's all right.